Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jennifer Dixon, and I'm going to be helping to moderate this meeting as well as being your hearings officer for the public hearing that will follow the informational session. So again, thanks for joining us. We are here to talk about an air permit for the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant. So this is a proposed permit, and we're going to talk through some things this evening that will hopefully give you a little bit more information to help you provide comments on the proposed permit if you would like to. So the first thing that we need to talk about is a little bit about how things are going to work tonight. So I think you already heard me mention that we're going to be doing an informational session, and then that will be followed by a public hearing. So these two parts of the evening work a little bit differently. And the first part of the evening, when we're doing the informational session, I will have some staff, which I will introduce to you in a couple of minutes here. They're going to be talking about the air quality division in general, a little bit about the permitting process, and then specifically about what Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant has been asking for. And then there will be time for question and answer after that. So that will give us an opportunity to answer any questions that you might have a little bit of dialogue and some give and take. At 7 o'clock, or when we're done answering questions, whatever comes sooner, we're going to shift over into the hearing portion of the night. The hearing portion is a little bit more of a formal part of the evening where we open it up with a formal statement, we take comments on the record, and then we formally close the hearing. So during that time, we won't be responding to any of your questions. Sometimes people will ask questions in their comments, and that's totally fine, but we won't be getting to those questions until when we respond to the comments. So I'll remind everybody about this as well a little bit later on, but I always want to talk about it in the beginning just so folks are understanding a little bit more about how the evening's going to run. So there's a few other things that we like to talk about before we get into the hearings, and that's our kind of our group norms for the day. So this slide was actually created in conjunction with some advocacy groups in the Flint area. So they were really helpful in kind of talking to us about how they felt these public hearings and meetings should run and giving us some kind of baselines for how we want to do it. So one of the things that we're asking participants to do is to, actively listen with an ear to understanding. That's one of the reasons why you joined us tonight, is because hopefully you want to understand a little bit more about what's going on. Definitely ask questions, and if we're not responding to them in a way that is helpful for you, then ask us for clarification. If you feel like you want to criticize something, then please criticize ideas and not specifically other participants in the meeting tonight. We want to make sure that we're communicating respectfully with each other, and that we take space and make space. And so what I mean by that is that we don't want to have one person asking all of the questions, things like that. We want to make sure that everybody who wants to ask a question has the opportunity to do that. So these are just kind of some helpful guidelines to hopefully set the stage for us having a really informative meeting tonight. So what I want to do now is I'm going to ask Chris Etheridge, he's our decision maker, to turn his camera on. I know he wanted to formally welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. So he's one of our Air Quality Division Assistant Director. So Chris, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take the floor.
Thanks, Jen. And just want to echo her comments. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. We truly appreciate and value the comments and concerns that you raise regarding this permitting decision. So very much appreciate everyone's participation tonight. Look forward to talking more about specifics on the project and hopefully being able to answer all questions or concerns that you might have. So welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Chris is going to be listening in to the whole meeting and hearing tonight, because as the decision maker, it's really important for him to know what folks' concerns and questions are. So rest of the staff that I have on for tonight, if you guys don't mind turning your cameras on, sorry about that. And I'll just run through really quickly introducing who we have with us tonight. It might help you know what kind of questions you might have going forward, but want to just quickly introduce everybody, and then you'll hear from them later on during the question and answer portion. So the first person I want to introduce you to is Andy Drury. Andy is the permit engineer on this project. So you're going to be hearing primarily from him. He's going to really walk through, like I said, some of the things that you're seeing on the agenda here, the discussion on the proposed permit and things like that. The next person I want to introduce is Joyce Zhu. Joyce is the district supervisor there in Warren. So she's going to be talking about what our district staff do when it comes to inspecting a facility like the Warren wastewater treatment plant, any sort of testing, record keeping, things like that. So she's really, her staff are more of a boots on the ground type of look on this. And since this is already an active facility, you know, there are some things that happen there. So you'll be hearing mostly from Andy and Joyce tonight, but I do have some other folks on with us tonight. One of them is Mike Deppa. Mike is one of our air quality division toxicologist. So toxicologists work on health-based screening levels to make sure that the air that we breathe meets certain standards when it comes through the permitting process. So he plays a really important role. I also have Jim Haywood on, and he works in our air modeling. So what an air modeler does at a very, very high level, and we'll talk about this more later, is they look at what would happen if a permit like this was issued. So it's really important, since this isn't happening yet, that they sort of look into the future using computer programs to ensure that any air that is going to be released from a facility like this would be protective of human health. So his role is also really important in the permitting process. We're also really lucky to have a couple other folks on with us tonight. We have Hala Burundi from our Water Resources Division, and then we also have Abigail Hendershot from MPARTR, the Michigan PFAS response team. So really happy to be able to have a lot of folks on to hopefully answer your questions. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention Caitlin DeVries and Jim Ostrowski. They work in our environmental support division, and they really help us make sure that these virtual meetings are the best that they can be. So thanks to staff. Andy, if you don't mind keeping your camera on, and everybody else, go ahead and turn yours off for now, and we'll get to you when we get to the Q&A for sure. So just walking through the agenda really quickly, again, we're going to start with that information session that's going to go through some high level things, but then also kind of dig into what the company is proposing and what the permitting process looks like. Then we'll have Joyce again talk to you about some compliance type of things and what the inspectors do. We'll get to that question and answer session. So I'll tell you how to ask those questions in just a second. Then we're going to shift over to that public hearing. So remember, we'll do that either at the end of Q&A. Sometimes we don't have a lot of questions, and that's fine. We'll get the hearing started early, or at 7 o'clock, whichever one comes sooner. After the hearing, if you don't submit a comment tonight, it's totally fine not to. We have time, and we have some other ways that you can submit an official comment. So we'll just talk through those really quickly. I'll tell you about where you can find some other information if this was kind of too high level for you and you want to dig a little deeper, or you know some others that might be interested in learning more. And then we'll talk about how you can contact these folks to get your questions answered. All right, so one other thing here. Oh, I guess I'm not going to talk about that. I was going to talk to you about how to ask questions. So I'll do that really quick before I pass it over to you, Andy. If you have questions as Andy's walking through the presentation, feel free to put them in the question box. That's totally fine. Sometimes your question might be answered as he talks through things, but it's really fine to just type that question in there. Once we get to that Q&A session, if you want to ask your question verbally, you do not have to, but if you really want to, we'll just encourage you to click that raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. And then I just want to make sure really quick that I don't have any folks calling in. I do have some folks calling in, so if you're calling in and you want to raise your hand to ask a question verbally, or when we get to the public hearing portion and you would like to make a comment on the record, you're going to just use #2 on your phone. That will raise your hand so that we can unmute your line. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Andy. Andy, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take hold of the presentation and the mic.
All right, thank you, Jen. As Jen said, my name is Andy, and I'm the lead permit engineer for the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant air permit application.
Hey, Andy,
yes.
Just 1 second. I'm sorry, you're kind of quiet. I don't know if you can sit a little bit closer to the mic. I'm just having a little hard time hearing you.
Sure, I will try and talk louder.
That's good. That's a lot better. Thank you.
My name is Andy, and I'm the lead permit engineer for the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant air permit application. I worked with a team of air quality staff, including some of the folks on our panel, to review the application. And before we get into the details of the project, I would like to talk about what the Air Quality Division does and how the permitting process works. Air pollution comes from many different sources, including power plants, fuel-burning vehicles, and various industrial sources. The overall mission of the AQD is to protect public health and the environment. We provide this protection by using our authority under state and federal laws through the regulation of industrial sources. AQD staff do a lot of different things. We monitor levels of air pollutants. We look at toxic air contaminants to make sure public health is protected. We conduct inspections of facilities like the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant. And we review applications and write permits for sources of air pollutants to make sure the proposed projects comply with state and federal rules to protect public health. Our rules require us to issue permits to sources of air pollutants. However, I'd like to point out a few things that the draft permit does not cover and that we aren't able to regulate. These include zoning, noise, and traffic on public roads. If you have questions or concerns about these issues, you will want to talk to your local government. And what residents think about a project is important. However, when making a decision on a permit application, we can't consider whether residents want the project to be done. And whether people think the project is needed is also important, but we can't consider that when making a decision on a permit application. We have to evaluate the project to ensure it meets the applicable air quality rules. If the project meets those rules, we are required to issue the air permit. To make sure a company is meeting all rules and regulations, they need to follow a permit to install for the equipment. I'd like to give you a simple overview of the air permitting process. First, the company decides they want to install, modify, or construct a source of air emissions. Then the company submits a permit application. The application is then reviewed by an engineer like myself to decide if their request can meet the state and federal air quality rules. During the review, other air quality staff are involved to help with different parts of the review, like the members on our panel. This includes the review of toxic air contaminants, also called TACs or TACs, and how the emissions may impact the surrounding community. If these rules are met, the engineer creates a draft permit. If public comment is required, as in this case, the draft permit is posted for the public to comment on. Public comment is a very important part of the permitting process, which is why we are talking with you tonight. Once the comment period ends, we evaluate all of the comments submitted. The comments can lead to changes in the permit and the final decision. And finally, a decision is made on the permit application. This decision could be to issue the permit as written, approve the permit with changes, or to deny the permit. And this decision is based on whether what the company wants to do can meet the air quality regulations. So the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant takes wastewater, residences, storms, and businesses, and processes it so the water can be safely discharged. Part of the treatment process involves removing solid waste material from the water. This waste is known as sludge, and it needs to be further processed before it can be disposed of. The Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant currently disposes of the sludge in the existing sewage sludge incinerator at the plant. The Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant is proposing to install a new sewage sludge disposal process. The process would include several air pollution control devices and 2 natural gas heaters. The proposed project would replace the existing disposal process. The project also involves installing an emergency generator to provide electrical power in the event of a power outage, as well as 2 air makeup units to heat the new building where the new equipment will be located. There are several steps in Warren's proposed sludge disposal process, so let's walk through the process to see how it works. First, a screw press is used to squeeze water out of the sludge. Like wringing out a towel, the press does not remove all of the water. The Energy Recovery System furnaces, or ERS furnace that we'll talk about shortly, needs the sludge to be drier than the press can make it. So from the press, the sludge goes to a Biocon dryer to remove more water. In the dryer, the sludge is spread onto a moving belt that carries it through the dryer. Heated air is blown through the dryer to heat the sludge and remove the water that evaporates. We will talk about how the air gets heated in a moment. The wet air from the dryer goes through a condenser to remove the water from the air. The condenser cools the air, causing the water to drop out. The water from the condenser goes back into the treatment plant. Dried air from the condenser can either go back into the dryer or it can go to the furnace depending on operational needs. The dried sludge is conveyed to the ERS furnace, where the sludge is used as fuel to generate heat. The hot exhaust air from the furnace goes through a heat exchanger where it heats a thermal oil. After the heat exchanger, most of the exhaust air is recirculated back into the furnace. The rest of the exhaust air goes to a series of air pollution control devices, which we'll talk about soon. The heated thermal oil goes to the dryer where it heats the air that I mentioned before. After heating the air, the oil goes back to the heat exchanger to be reheated. Normally, the ERS furnace will provide all of the heat needed for the Biocon dryer. When the furnace cannot provide enough heat for the dryer, like during startup of the system, the thermal oil is heated using a natural gas-fired heater. Ash is generated from burning the sludge, and the ash will be collected and disposed of the same way ash from the existing incinerator is disposed of. To handle the amount of sludge generated by the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant, there would be two sets of this equipment operating in tandem. The exhaust gas from the furnace would go through a series of several air pollution control devices before being released to the air. The first control device is the cyclone, which reduces the amount of large particles emitted to the air. The particles would be collected with the ash from the furnace and then disposed of. After the cyclone, the exhaust air would go through a selective catalytic reduction, or SCR system, that reduces the amount of nitrogen oxides, or NOx, that's emitted. After the SCR, the exhaust would go through a wet scrubber to reduce emissions of pollutants like hydrogen chloride, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. The wet scrubber would use water from the treatment plant to come into direct contact with the exhaust air. The water used in the scrubber would go back into the treatment plant. Air leaving the scrubber would then go through a wet electrostatic precipitator, or wet ESP, which uses static electricity to remove more particulate matter and metals. The water used in the wet ESP would go back to the treatment plant. The final control device would be an activated carbon system to reduce emissions of mercury and dioxins and furans. After leaving the activated carbon, the exhaust would be routed to the stack. There would be two sets of control devices, one for each sludge processing system. And if there are any PFAS compounds that are not destroyed in the furnace, the scrubber and the activated carbon could reduce the amount that's emitted to the air. So now that we've talked about what Warren is requesting, let's talk about how we review a permit application. When reviewing a proposed project, the permit engineer works with other air quality staff, and this review includes the state and federal rules that apply to the project, evaluating the proposed air emissions against the rules that apply, and this includes checking the emission calculations, an air toxics review to make sure toxic air contaminants meet AQD's health-based screening levels, and air modeling for criteria pollutants and toxic air contaminants when it's needed. So in the end, we need to know if Warren's new sewage sludge disposal process meets these requirements. I'm going to talk in more detail about the different parts of the review in the coming slides. So even after all the pollution control devices I talked about earlier, the proposed sewage sludge disposal process would still release some air pollutants. No pollution control device is 100% efficient. In this slide, I will talk about the categories or groups of air pollutants, and then a bit about what Warren is proposing. The first group are criteria pollutants. This is a small group of well-studied and regulated pollutants. For this project, we looked at nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, and fine particulate matter that we call PM2.5. EPA sets national ambient air quality standards, referred to as NAAQS, for these pollutants to protect public health and the environment. Any releases of these pollutants must be below the NAAQS. Hazardous air pollutants are a larger group of pollutants. These are known or suspected to cause health effects or environmental effects. We regulate these pollutants by applying any federal regulations that exist. If no specific regulations exist, as is the case here, then we look at these pollutants differently. These are important to examine, so we review them through our state rules for toxic air contaminants. And then toxic air contaminants, that's a larger group of pollutants covered by Michigan rules. They include almost any air pollutant, including hazardous air pollutants. Our rules allow toxicologists to set health-based screening levels for these toxic air contaminants, and pollutants being released must meet these health-based screening levels. I will talk a little bit more about these pollutants in the next few slides. So this table shows the potential criteria pollutant emissions from Warren's proposed new process. This information can also be found in Table 1 of the technical fact sheet. These emissions account for the entire project: the biocon dryers, the ARS furnaces, the backup generator, the thermal oil heaters, the building heaters, and the air pollution control equipment. The potential emissions from the proposed project are less than their respective significant emission rates, so the project is not subject to additional permit review that would otherwise be required. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, known as PFAS, are a group of man-made chemicals used in making things like firefighting foam, stain repellents, and non-stick cookware. PFAS can't break down easily in the environment and are also difficult to destroy. Some PFAS can build up in our bodies, which can lead to health risks. Warren and Eagle have tested the sludge produced by the wastewater treatment plant, and some PFAS have been found. Because PFAS is an emerging issue, there is not much available information on pollution control for PFAS. However, a 2023 pilot scale study conducted by US EPA showed that when burned at a temperature of 1,994 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, more than 99.9% of the PFAS is destroyed, and we call this destruction efficiency. Therefore, the proposed permit conditions require the furnaces to operate at a minimum temperature of 1,994 degrees. To estimate the potential PFAS emissions from the process, a 90% destruction efficiency was assumed. This lower efficiency was used because Warren's proposed process will be quite different from the pilot process used in the EPA study. This worst-case emission rate, based on 90% destruction, was then used for the health-based screening level review, which showed the emissions comply with the screening levels. We expect most, if not all, of the PFAS will be destroyed in the furnace. I want to talk in more detail about toxic air contaminants and their health-based screening levels. The screening levels are designed to protect against health issues, including developing cancer or breathing problems. When we performed our review of Warren's proposed process, we looked at all toxic air contaminants from all of the different equipment. Our review of the proposed emissions, including the PFAS emissions and the modeling, which I will talk about next, determined the proposed emissions would be able to comply with the health-based screening levels. So what is modeling, and why is it important to the review of a permit application? Computer modeling predicts what concentrations neighbors could be exposed to under the worst-case scenarios. The modeling simulates a grid of virtual air monitors surrounding the facility. This allows the highest concentration to be considered. Modeling was done for all of the toxic air contaminants. The AQD's criteria pollutant modeling policy would not require modeling for this project. However, modeling was done anyway, referred to as NOx or NOx, and particulate matter less than 2.5 microns, called PM2.5, because these pollutants are closest to their significant emission rates. The modeling showed the proposed emissions of all TACs meet their health-based screening levels, and the NOx and PM2.5 would be in compliance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So let's talk about what a permit is, and I will give you more details about the proposed permit for Warren. A permit is a legally enforceable document with a list of requirements called conditions the company must comply with. The requirements in the permit ensure the project operates as described in the application and the way it was reviewed by myself and the rest of the AQD permitting team. A permit has requirements such as emission limits, material limits, proper operating parameters for control devices and other equipment, and monitoring, record keeping, and reporting requirements. The proposed draft conditions for the Warren wastewater treatment plant include limits and operational requirements for the proposed equipment based on our technical review. The main source of potential air emissions are the emission reduction system furnaces. Key conditions for this equipment include emission limits for several criteria pollutants and toxic air contaminants, including PFOS and PFOA, which are two specific PFAS compounds. The furnaces are required to operate at 1,994 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, and they are required to destroy at least 90% of the PFAS in the sludge. Most emission limits require testing to make sure the emission limits are met. Testing of the PFAS destruction efficiency is also required. If testing shows emission limits or the PFAS destruction efficiency are not met, Warren could face enforcement action. And the AQD will oversee the testing to ensure that it's done correctly. The amount of sludge that can be processed is also limited, and only sludge produced at the Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant can be processed. US EPA rules consider the ERS furnaces to be new sewage sludge incinerators, so there are emission limits and other requirements from the EPA rules. The new process cannot operate at the same time as the existing process. Either one can operate at any given moment, so Warren can make sure the new process is working before they shut down the existing process. But the existing process has to be shut down within 2 years after the new process starts up. There are also requirements for the other equipment that is part of the project. The backup generator, which will provide power in the event of a power outage, is subject to EPA standards that include emission limits and certification or emission testing. Hours of operation are limited to 500 hours per year. Thermal oil heaters have a limit on how much natural gas they can burn per year, and they are required to have low NOx burners. The heaters for the new building have to burn natural gas, and they have a limit on how big they can be. So now that we've talked about the permitting process, I'll turn it over to Joyce Zhu.
Good evening. My name is Joyce Zhu. I'm the Air Quality District Supervisor in Warren. Part of the district role is to determine if the company's operation is in compliance with the corresponding permits as well as the state and the federal regulations. We can achieve this by conducting inspections periodically, reviewing companies' reports, records, and observing various air quality emission tests as required by the permit or regulations. This permit has set emission limits for various pollutants and chemicals. The company can demonstrate continuous compliance by emission tests, operating the process within the material limit and in accordance with the operational parameters set during the tests, and continuously monitoring and recording the required parameters. Typically, an inspection entails the following step: to verify if the process is operated in the same fashion as during the emission tests, to obtain various monitoring data and operational parameters, to review company's record as required by the permit and the regulations for compliance determination. Next slide, please. Emission tests are one of the methods to show compliance. District staff, along with the staff from the technical programs unit, will go to observe the tests. The district will make sure that the company operates in the same fashion as during later inspections. Let me provide you an analogy. In the 80s, vehicles need to pass an emission test in order to have a license renewed. Some shops would offer the guaranteed certification if you pay extra amount of money. To do this, the shop would set the timing bell in the position that the vehicle could pass the test. Yet, the vehicle is not drivable in this setting. After the vehicle passes the test, the shop would reset back the timing bell. This type of act would defeat the purpose of emission tests. To prevent a similar act during the stack test, district staff will be on site to check the company's operation condition, to record some of the operational parameters such as temperature of the incinerator, pressure drop of a control device, etc., to make sure that the process is operated at maximum capacity or the worst case scenario that would generate more emissions. As can be seen, during the stack test, the district staff will perform following duties. To determine that the test is performed in accordance with the designated test method. To make sure that the operation is under normal condition during the test. To record some of the operational parameters with which will be compared during later inspections. Next slide. The company's record monitoring data and the reports are the mechanisms to show continuous compliance. The district will require those information to verify compliance. For example, pressure drop of a control devices, the flow rate from a scrubber, the incinerator temperature, etc. Those records provide indicators of proper operation of the emission control devices, as well as the process. Reviewing company records and data, the district is able to evaluate compliance of the operation to identify if any abnormality has occurred, to compare monitoring parameters range with those observed during stack tests to assess emissions from the operation. In summary, the district is responsible for verifying compliance of the company's operation by conducting periodic inspection, by reviewing company's record and data, and by going on-site to observe various emission tests. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Appreciate it. Thank you, Andy. So this is the time of the night we're going to shift into the question and answer portion of the night. So if I can just have my panelists turn your cameras on so you can be ready if any questions end up coming your way. So as a reminder, there are a couple people who are calling in. So if you're calling in and you have a question for the panelists, please go ahead and use #2 on your phone. And then anybody else who's here listening in and has a question, a clarification, or anything that you'd like to ask Andy or Joyce or any of the other panelists, you can type your question into that question and answer box and we'll get right to that. So just while folks are thinking about questions that they might have, we are going to be talking a little bit more about public comment after this, and then we're going to be shifting into that public hearing portion of the night where it's a little bit more formal and we won't be able to have as much give and take. So this is your opportunity definitely to get some answers from our staff. If anything that Andy talked about wasn't unclear, if you want it to be reiterated, or if you want to hear more about what the district inspector's role is when it comes to facilities like this, and operations like this. So it's definitely something that I know can be a little bit daunting when you're first hearing about it. So one of the things that we'll talk about after the hearing portion of the night is just where you can find some more of the information that Andy talked about. I know he talked about the technical fact sheet, which is kind of a deep dive into the technical review that staff did to generate this draft permit. So a lot of people like to dig a little deeper, and that's totally fine if you're really into maths and looking at pollutants and things like that. It's definitely a very good resource for you. Then we have some other higher level information that gives you an overview. So a lot of times we'll have folks come in that, you know, their neighbor wants to hear more about it. It's just an easy thing to be able to say like, hey, I went to this meeting. Here's what I heard. Here's a little bit more information. We always appreciate when folks share that information. So just in case folks are typing, I can't tell, so I'm going to waste a little bit more time. I want to make sure that we don't skip questions if folks have them. But so a couple other things. We'll talk about this again in a couple minutes, but the comment period will stay open until August 20th. So you definitely have a little bit more time to put comments in on this draft permit if you'd like to. No pressure on doing that this evening. I know sometimes people think the hearing is the only time that they can submit their comments on the record, and it's definitely not. We'll go over the other ways that people can do that if they would like to later. If you make a comment tonight, that doesn't preclude you from making another comment. You're definitely able to do that as well. Some of the ways that we allow comments to be submitted do allow you to have attachments and things like that if you would like to provide us with more information, and that happens as well. So with that being said, I'm very good at dilly-dallying, so I will give you guys another minute or so here just in case someone's typing in a long question, and then if we don't get any questions, we'll head right into the hearing and get that part of the night started. So I'll give you another minute or so just in case folks have questions. And just a reminder, #2 on your phone if you're calling in and you'd like to raise your hand. All right, well, while you guys are thinking, I'm gonna go over one more slide here. Just make sure everybody gets a chance if they have questions to ask them. I just don't like to skip ahead just in case folks do, but while you're thinking about any questions, I'm just gonna go over public comments really quickly here. So a lot of times we get questions about what is a good comment or what can I comment on? Some people, if you've never done it before, it feels a little, you might feel a little bit unsure and insecure about what you can do. So one of the things I like to say is everybody is free to comment on anything. Anything in the draft permit is open for comment. So there's definitely some things that are more likely to lead to changes. Andy talked a little bit about in the beginning, things that are outside of our authority, like noise, traffic, zoning, things like that. Generally speaking, whether you support the project or oppose the project, those aren't something that can come into Chris's decision to grant the permit or not. So we always just like to talk about that. But again, if that's a comment that you want to make, we're happy to accept those comments, and people submit them all the time, and they're definitely something that's important to put on the record. Things that are more likely to lead to changes are things that are focused on the content and the basis of the permit. So did Andy and Mike and Jim do a good job reviewing the permit application and then writing a draft permit that encompassed all the rules and regulations that were necessary, that was protective? Was there something that was missed in there? A lot of times that are things that are going to make changes to a final permit decision. Something like saying, please fix all the typos. I mean, we know we're not perfect, so there's definitely typos in there. So if you find one, that's a great comment. That's a very simplified version of things that are likely to lead to changes. So generally, things that are outside the scope of the permit, we wouldn't be able to consider in a decision, but everything else is open for comment, and we welcome those comments for sure. We were just talking before the meeting started about some other previous permits that we've been working on that we've gotten a lot of comments, and it's something that we enjoy working through those, and they have definitely led to changes in the final permit decision. So they've been really helpful. But seeing no questions, thank you to everyone. Thanks, Caitlin, for putting that information in the chat to folks. Chris, if you don't mind turning your camera on, we'll get into the hearing. And then everybody else, thank you so much for being part of the panel. We will be sharing folks' information at the end. And if you have questions following up to this meeting, they're always more than welcome to answer them at that time. So I'm going to shift over to that public hearing portion of the night. And like I said, this is a little bit more formal, so I do have to read a pretty dry opening statement. I'll apologize in advance if it's a little bit dry, but it does have some important information for you, and it does kind of officially kick off the hearing portion of the night. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this public hearing. My name is Jennifer Dixon. I am with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and I will be the hearings officer tonight. Chris Etheridge, Assistant Division Director of the Air Quality Division, is the decision maker for this permit application and is joining me in listening to your comments this evening. He will be considering all comments before making a decision. This hearing is related to a request from Warren Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is an existing source located at 32360 Warcock Avenue in Warren, Michigan. The company has requested to install a new sewage sludge disposal process to replace the existing sewage sludge incinerator. The Air Quality Division is responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants to minimize adverse impacts on public health and the environment. The law governing those responsibilities is Part 55 of the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act. Before the company can install and operate any new equipment, it must obtain a permit that meets the requirements of Michigan's air quality laws. This means the equipment must be capable of meeting state and federal emission standards, including health-based standards. The proposed permit must also contain conditions that include emission limits and specific ways of operating the equipment to ensure these standards are met. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to allow anyone interested in the proposed permit to provide information we can use in deciding whether to approve the permit or if there is additional issues to consider. The proposed permit is still a draft permit. This does not mean the department has already made a decision. Instead, it reflects an initial technical review of the proposal. We hope having the details of the draft permit available will help you to provide comments. Everything in the draft permit remains open for comment and further consideration by the department, including whether the permit will be granted at all. The department can only use information you provide if it relates to criteria we can use in making a decision. So for example, local zoning, truck traffic, and noise concerns are not within our authority. Some of you may want to express your support or opposition to the proposed project, and we are happy to make note of your position, but the law does not allow us to base our decision on whether there is widespread support or opposition to the proposed project. This hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information we will consider in deciding on the proposed project. The public comment period for the proposed permit began on June 26th and will end on August 20, 2024. Additional comments or information may be submitted through that time via written or verbal comment. This can be done during this hearing by email or by voicemail. After the public comment period closes, the decision maker will review all written and verbal comments received. All significant air quality related comments will be considered, at which point a final decision will be made by the decision maker. The decision maker may deny the permit, approve as drafted, or approve with amendments. If approved, the decision will specify which provisions of the draft permit, if any, have been changed in the final permit and the reasons for the change. In all three of these scenarios, all interested parties, including everyone who was on the original mailing list, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended the public hearing will be directly notified of the decision. Included in the mailing will be a letter from the decision maker regarding the decision and, if applicable, the approved permit. Please recognize department staff are here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your views on the proposed project and to listen to those comments. You may submit a written comment at any time during the public comment period by US Post or email, or you may call in a comment to our public comment voicemail. I will call the names of the people who indicate they would like to make a comment tonight. Let me know you would like to make a verbal comment by using the raise hand icon, or if you are calling in, you will use #2 on your phone. You can submit a written comment tonight by typing the word comment into your question box and submit your comment in writing. Thank you so much for your attention. I will now start calling the names of those who indicate they would like to make a statement. So if you'd like to make a statement tonight, that would be wonderful, and we're happy to do that. You're going to want to just use that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Or like I mentioned, if we have folks calling in, you can use #2 on your phone, and that will raise your hand virtually for us, and we'll unmute your line so you can make your comment. So I would just ask that if you do make a comment tonight, please state your name and any affiliation that you'd like to mention for the record before you start into your official comment. All right. I'm not seeing any raised hands tonight. Chris, are you okay if I go ahead and close the hearing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Just need to read a closing statement. We'll have a few more slides after the hearing is officially closed. And then we'll let you go for the evening. So trying to still talk slow in case somebody's typing a comment into the question box. Don't want to preclude anybody from making a comment tonight that would like to. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close out the hearing. So thank you for taking the time to participate in this meeting tonight. We appreciate your interest in protecting Michigan's air quality. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, the public comment period will close at midnight on August 20, 2024. All interested parties, anyone who provided comments during the public comment period, and anyone who attended this public hearing will be directly notified of the final decision on the proposed permit. The hearing is now closed. Thank you so much again. So like I mentioned, just a couple other slides to go over tonight if it's helpful for folks. If you didn't submit a comment tonight, which obviously folks didn't, and that's fine. Sorry about that. Hold on a second. Big dogs make big barks. Apologies, everybody, if you could hear that. So a couple other things, you can submit an official comment still until the 20th. A few different ways you can do that. You can send us a letter, like we always like to say. You can send that comment in on a napkin, you can send it online to her. Any way you'd like to get it to us, we'll take that comment for sure. You can also send us an email with your comment in writing. Like I said, feel free to attach anything that might be supporting information for you. That's going to go to eagle-aqd-pt public comments at michigan.gov. So that's eagle, EGLE-AQD, and then -PTI public comments. And PTI public comments is all one word, as well as at Michigan, all one word spelled out, .gov. You can give us a call. A lot of people love to call the public comment voicemail box. It's really handy if you want to just speak your comment. It makes it a little bit easier. And that number is 517-284-0900. You can find all of this information on our website at michigan.gov/Eagle Air Public Notice. And Eagle Air Public Notice is also kind of one word there. Just remember Eagle is EGLE for you. All right, so on that same page, you're going to find links to other information. So I alluded to this earlier, that proposed project summary is a very high level overview of this proposed project, but it does give you some details on some of the things that Andy touched on tonight, what the company is asking for, the permit review, a little bit about the pollutant emissions that they're proposing, again, how to make a comment. So it's really kind of a helpful piece of information, but more high level. The technical fact sheet dives a little bit deeper into the project, really gets into what Andy and the other folks reviewed as part of reviewing the application, looking at pollutant emissions a lot closer, very specific on rules and regulations that were evaluated to ensure that this permit as drafted will comply with those rules and regulations. Of course, the proposed permit terms and conditions are on there, so you can really see what the company would be required to do if this was issued. If you're not familiar with looking at those, feel free to reach out to Andy or any of the other staff online tonight. We're happy to talk you through those. They can be a little bit like, what is this actually saying here? We're happy to talk through those with you because, you know, it's a little bit of a different, a formalized language for sure. We will also be posting the link to the meeting tonight. So this was recorded and we will post that link as well. You'll also get a follow-up email from me in the next day or so. Might come from Caitlin or it'll come from me depending on when that recording is posted. We'll just give you some links to some helpful information, hopefully link to the recording, things like that. So as always, we're always here to answer questions that you might have. We're happy to do so. Here is some information on the folks that were online tonight. So you heard from Andy, you heard from Joyce. Andy, I'm just going to read your email out because we do have some folks calling in. So if you're calling in and you want to get a hold of anybody that was on the panel tonight, you can go through Andy and he can always forward those questions on to folks that are the ones that would answer those if it's not him. So his last name is Drury. It's a D as in dog, R, U as in umbrella, R, and then Y, and then the letter A. So Drury A at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. Can also give him a call at 517-648-6663. So any questions, give Andy a call and he'll make sure that those get answered. So that being said, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate the time and attention that you gave to us. I know it's a beautiful summer night, and I'm sure folks would be happy to be outside. And maybe there's some of you that are looking forward to the Lions game at 7. I know I have some folks at my house that are. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Again, really appreciate you being on. And Caitlin, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and close out the meeting.